This house is for me and my parents. Write up the divorce papers and get out.
My husband Leon, who has been treating me like a maid and always favoring his parents, is again saying whatever he pleases. I've been patient so far to avoid upsetting my parents, who were so happy about our marriage, but if he's going to behave like this in front of them, it suits me fine. Alright, I'll do as you say. I left the room, taking my distraught parents with me. When will he realize his numerous misunderstandings? I'm looking forward to it. My name is Jessica, 29 years old. I was born when both of my parents were 40 years old. They wanted a child, but it didn't come easy, and infertility treatments were not as advanced as they are now, so they had a lot of distress. Just as they were about to give up on having a child, that's when I came into their lives, and even now my parents still talk about it joyfully. Being the long-awaited child, I was doted on immensely by my parents. Even when looking at my childhood photos, I can feel the love my parents had for me. Although my parents were not wealthy, they always celebrated events like my birthday, Easter, and my kindergarten graduation in a grand manner. They were also very supportive of my studies. If I said I wanted to learn English, they immediately enrolled me in an English conversation class, and they bought me a lot of books because I loved reading. They also said, "If it's something you need for your studies, just let us know and we'll get it for you." Looking back, I now realize that they must have struggled quite a bit to cover my education expenses, but they never showed it. They always treated me with smiles and celebrated greatly when I got good grades. As I grew older, sometimes my friends would mistake my parents for my grandparents, but I never minded. I met my now husband Leon at a matchmaking service. Leon, like me, was an only child with elderly parents, and our circumstances were similar. We had the same hobbies, and our conversations were lively. We dated smoothly and decided to get married. My loving parents were in tears at our wedding, blessing our marriage. At first, I was working after our marriage, but Leon proposed.
We both have elderly parents. Of course, we don't feel dissatisfied about it, but wouldn't it be nice if they were younger? It's tough to raise a child in old age. We want to have children sooner, so can you quit your job and focus on raising a child?
I loved my job, but what Leon said made sense. I remembered my mother telling me that her night shift job and the stress from it, as well as not being able to get the timing right for conception, might have been reasons why they had difficulty having me. I thought it might be a good idea to quit my job and focus on creating a conducive environment for having a baby. Plus, Leon said,
"You can return to work when our child is old enough,"
which reassured me. Fortunately, I had a professional certification that would allow me to return to work anytime. So, I quit my job and became a full-time homemaker. However, after our marriage, Leon started acting high and mighty just because I was a homemaker. Before we got married, I thought Leon treated me as an equal, but after, he started acting as if he was superior. Being a housewife isn't exactly a walk in the park. Between cooking 3 meals a day, cleaning, laundry, things I used to casually handle when I was alone, became a challenge, especially since Leon is particular about details and won't allow any slack.
Dinner should always consist of at least 3 dishes. Also, ensure there's hot pancakes for breakfast. My mom managed to do that even while working. When I wake up in the morning, my suit and shirt should be ready on the hanger. Just grab my bag and go. That's the least you can do as a housewife. That's how my parents always did it.
Every time I tried to object, he would retort,
"You're a housewife, aren't you? Don't get too high and mighty while eating off my dime."
That became his catchphrase. Despite his complaints about me eating off his dime, the money Leon gave for household expenses was barely enough. I spent my days scrutinizing our budget, constantly scouring the internet for money-saving tips. One day, given the situation, I mused out loud, maybe I should go back to work. Leon responded with,
"Didn't you say you used to work at a law firm? Being a secretary there won't make much money. I won't allow you to neglect housework for that."
So he wouldn't even let me return to work. I wondered if Leon was misunderstanding something. However, by this time, I was too tired of his constant complaints and shouting to argue. And truthfully, I wasn't sure if I could maintain the quality of housekeeping and care for Leon if I was also working. Moreover, I didn't want to upset my parents, who were so happy about our marriage, so I couldn't confide in them. But it wasn't just Leon's attitude that bothered me. He frequently invited his parents to our house. Mother's Day, Father's Day, his parents' birthdays. He would find any excuse to invite them over and have me prepare the meal. On these occasions, Leon would give me extra money, instructing me to buy some good fish or make a steak from premium beef. Every time we hosted his parents, Leon would give them gifts. His parents would eat and drink to their heart's content, treating our house as if it was their own, without thanking me, and then they'd leave. Once, I asked Leon, "I think it's great that you honor your parents, and I don't oppose it, but can we also invite my parents occasionally?" Leon immediately turned sour and snapped. "Why would we do that? Understand this. I'm the one paying for the meals and gifts. Why should I spend money on your parents who aren't even blood related to me?" He dismissed the suggestion. Resigned, I started secretly using my savings from before I was married to buy presents for my parents. Then one day, my parents contacted me looking troubled. They told me there was a fire in the apartment next to their house, and part of their home was burned down. Thankfully, they were unharmed, but the house required major repairs. They were temporarily living in a makeshift house. I decided to visit my parents. Even though they were going through a tough time, they welcomed me warmly. When my father gently asked, "Is your marriage going well?" a twinge of sadness hit me as I replied, "Yes, we're getting along all right." When I inquired about their future plans, he explained that their partially burned down house had been standing since my great-grandfather's era and was incredibly old to begin with, so they were thinking about letting it go. They were considering moving into a rental apartment going forward. My mother sighed. "Even though it's an old house, it's filled with memories of Jessica, so it's sad to let it go." At that moment, I made up my mind. I decided to discuss this with Leon when I got home. "Do you remember I mentioned that my parents' house was caught in a fire and burned down? Given their age, I was thinking of buying them a new house, maybe one equipped with accessibility features." Leon curtly retorted, "Huh? Where's the money coming from? I'm not putting in a dime." Just as I'd expected, I replied, "I'm not planning on building a mansion, so it won't be a burden on you. I intend to use my savings for my single days." Leon pondered for a bit, then casually responded, "Guess even a law firm clerk can save that much. Well, if you're not using my money, then it's fine." So I decided to give my parents a house. I felt it was high time I paid back their kindness. Several months later, "Leon, I'm helping my parents move tomorrow," I told him. Leon replied, "All right, I got it, but don't neglect your house chores," then retreated to the bedroom. The next day, I went to help my parents move. Unbeknownst to me, a group of individuals had begun tailing me at that point. We carried my parents' belongings into the house, and we were relaxing in the living room. We were all filled with joy at being together as a family after so long. But then Leon and my in-laws suddenly barged in. While we stared in bewilderment, Leon declared, "From today, this is my house." I was taken aback by Leon's sudden appearance. "Why are you here?" When I asked this, he haughtily replied, "I heard you were moving today, so I followed you." When I responded, "What? My house? What are you talking about? I don't understand." Leon stated, "I've been supporting you all this while. Just marrying someone as clueless as you is something you should be grateful for. My parents have always eaten your terrible cooking with patience. Now it's your turn to return the favor." What a repulsive man. As I stared at him in silence, Leon continued, "I've canceled the lease on our apartment. Take your stuff and get out." At that moment, my confused father started to say, "Leon, this house," but I stopped him from speaking. Strangely calm, a plan was taking shape in my mind. Instead of my father, I said, "This house is our home, my parents and me. What are you talking about?" When I relayed that, Leon replied laughing, "Don't you understand English? I'm saying the house you bought was my house all along. This is now my parents' house and mine. Oh, I also left divorce papers at home. You be sure to submit them." Ignoring my parents' attempts to speak, I told him, "All right, I will follow your instructions." Then I asked the movers to reload the truck we had just unloaded, instructing them on what to do. As this happened, another truck arrived, carrying Leon's and his parents' belongings. I reassured my unsettled parents by saying, "I will explain everything later, just follow my instructions for now." We then left the house together. During our ride, I explained to my parents what was going on. "Listen, I've kept quiet about this until now." Once they heard everything, they understood and praised my actions. It reminded me of the joy I felt as a child when I was praised by my parents. A few weeks later, I got repeated calls from Leon. Reluctantly, I answered the phone. Without waiting for my hello, Leon shouted, "Hey, isn't this the house you bought? Someone just told me they're going to call the cops if I don't leave." "Yeah, that's correct. So when you said that house was ours, I was taken aback. That rental was your house, huh?" I replied, laughing. This made Leon absolutely livid.
"Hey, quit mocking me. Just explain it. Wasn't that house bought for your parents?"
Then I explained everything to Leon step by step. The house that I had bought for my parents was under renovation after the purchase. However, the day before moving in, the renovation company told us, due to our mistake, the work will not be finished on the scheduled date. It was entirely the renovation company's fault. Since they had contacted us in the evening, it was too late to cancel the movers. The renovation company, taking responsibility for their mistake, arranged a rental house for us to live in until the real house was ready. It was a model home that had finished its exhibition period. We planned to live there until the renovations were completed, but Leon and his parents moved in by mistake. When my parents tried to clarify, I decided to get revenge based on Leon's terrible misinterpretation. After that, I stored all of our belongings in a rented storage unit and lived in a hotel with my parents. Meanwhile, I submitted the divorce papers prepared by Leon as he had instructed, and that's how I got divorced from him. My parents told me you should have consulted us sooner. However, I think things turned out for the best. I was able to spend time with my parents and managed to divorce Leon. Now, I'm living with my parents in our newly renovated house. I've deliberately not shared our new address with Leon, so he has no idea where we live. Leon once asked me,
"But how are you going to support yourself without me? You were just a stay-at-home wife, right?"
With a sigh, I answered, "You know, I didn't expect you to be under this misconception for so long, but my profession is a lawyer, you know?"
"Huh?"
Leon seemed shocked and responded with a confused reply. When I first met Leon at a matchmaking service, he asked me what I did for a living. I told him that I worked at a law firm. He assumed I was a secretary. I let him believe that because when I'd previously mentioned being a lawyer, people often remarked how stuffy it sounded or how they didn't like being corrected based on the law. I hadn't imagined he'd continue to mistake me for a secretary after that. It showed how little interest he really had in me. I guess Leon wanted a housewife more than a partner. I think the reason he asked me to be a stay-at-home wife was just that. I bought the house with the savings I had from my time as a single lawyer.
"If you explain that, well, we're married, so I should have a claim to the property."
I responded, "The savings I had before marriage are mine, and they're not subject to property division. If you have a problem with that, we can go to court, but I'll win, of course." Hearing this, Leon fell silent on the other end of the phone. I ignored such remarks from Leon, saying, "Well then, goodbye. Be nice to your beloved parents." And with that, I hung up the phone. I heard about what happened next through a fellow attorney who used to be my colleague. Leon kept contacting me, unable to accept the situation, so I reluctantly decided to communicate with him through my attorney. Leon was insisting on me returning the money we had spent during our married life. However, after discussions through the lawyer, he understood that it was not feasible and seemed quite disappointed. That's expected. After all, I became a stay-at-home wife because Leon asked me to, and it's a husband's duty to provide for his family. I did everything that I should have as a homemaker, and I didn't fall short. Leon had terminated our apartment lease himself, leaving him with no place to stay. Currently, he has moved back into the small condo where his parents lived, and the three of them are living there, uncomfortably crammed into the small space. Leon had virtually no savings. He had a low salary, and yet, he made me stay at home, only gave me the bare minimum for living expenses, and spent the rest of the money on his hobbies and gifts for his parents. Despite this, Leon was starting to desire a larger house. He seemed to have come up with this plan when I mentioned to my parents that I wanted to buy a house. Needless to say, it failed spectacularly. Even if it weren't a temporary home, assuming that we would leave quietly is just stupid. It's pathetic to realize how naive my ex-husband was. Leon is now tired of caring for his parents in the cramped condo, and he has been pressing for reconciliation many times, now that he knows I'm a lawyer. Of course I've been ignoring him. I'm currently enjoying my time in my new house with my parents. At the moment, I'm not particularly keen on getting married again. However, a fellow attorney who I worked with during my divorce from Leon has been showing some interest. I am considering being a bit more positive about it, perhaps to give my beloved parents the joy of seeing their grandkids sooner.
Get out. You're not my daughter. In front of me, my mother shouted loudly enough to spit, her face red with anger. She held a knife in both hands, and its tip was pointed towards me. I can't support a money-guzzling parasite like you without even giving me living expenses. Not only do I not receive any financial support from her, but I also contribute more than half of my income, which amounts to $3,000, to the household every month. There's no way she doesn't know about it. And I've explained it countless times, but it seems nothing I say will get through to her now. I've had arguments with her before where she stopped listening, but I never expected her to bring out a knife. Anyway, I need to keep my distance without provoking her to avoid any injuries. My mother's cold voice reaches me. I wish I hadn't given birth to a parasite like you. I am Stacy, 29 years old. Thanks to my hard work, I now work as a system engineer at a well-known corporation. I ended up in my current job because of my father's influence. My father has always been fond of computers. He loved machines since he was a child, and he was apparently extremely excited the first time he saw a computer. I was excited back then, but today's computers are amazing. Look at this one. It's so thin, yet the screen is so beautiful. Saying that my father would laugh and often take me to electronics stores when I was in elementary school. He showed me the latest computer models and pointed out what was impressive about them. Watching my father enjoy working with computers, I developed an interest in them as well. My father, who was usually quiet, would teach me various things when it came to computers. Before I knew it, I realized I was better at using computers than most people around me, and I wanted to delve deeper into the field. So I entered the Faculty of Science and Engineering at university. I didn't hesitate during my job search and chose a career related to computers. I now work as a system engineer at my current company. While most of my work is remote, I've enjoyed it, and I've achieved outstanding results among my peers. I occasionally visit my parents' house and have enjoyable conversations with my father about work. One day, my father suddenly collapsed. I received a call from my mother and rushed to the hospital. Is Dad okay? He collapsed out of nowhere, so I called an ambulance immediately. They did some tests at the hospital, and it seemed to be a subarachnoid hemorrhage. They say he needs surgery. I don't know what will happen to our lives from now on. So, that's Dad. I prayed for my father's well-being while waiting. A few hours later, the doctor came out of the operating room and explained my father's condition. The surgery was successful, but there might be some residual effects on his limbs. I was relieved that his life had been saved, at least for now. My mother was concerned about her future and said, I wonder what we'll do about work from now on. I'm worried about whether I'll be able to work. If we lose our source of income, how will we live? My mother was always preoccupied with her own life, putting herself first rather than her family. Seeing my mother like this made me sad once again. I visited the hospital several times during my father's hospitalization. and as the doctor had mentioned, my father seemed to have difficulty moving his limbs. He was making efforts at rehabilitation, but there would be lingering effects. While in the hospital, my mother only brought the essentials and left quickly. Due to the lengthy commute from his current workplace and his physical condition, my father had no choice but to retire early. Additionally, living alone was challenging due to the need for care. So, I talked to my mother. Dad's physical condition makes it difficult for him to do everything himself. So I want you to help him. However, I didn't expect a positive response from the beginning. I'm busy with many things, and I can't take care of your father. My mother instantly rejected my request. I was disappointed. My mother was not the type of person to prioritize family over herself. She always put herself first. However, I believed she had love for my father. So I thought she would extend a helping hand in his current condition. Unfortunately, my request for caregiving was also declined. I see. All right then, I'll come to stay there. I'll take care of Dad. That would be helpful. When can you come? Since my job mostly involved remote work. As long as I had a computer and an environment for online meetings, I thought I could manage both work and caregiving. It would be a challenging life, juggling work and caregiving. But I decided to return home to live with my father and mother, all for the sake of my beloved father. On the day I moved back home and started unpacking, my mother approached me. Listen, about meals, make sure you can have breakfast by 7 a.m. For your health, it's good to have things like fruit and salad. Also, please put the garbage in small bags frequently and keep them together. I don't like the smell. Oh, and burnable trash is collected on Mondays and Thursdays. So make sure to dispose of it then. And you should clean every day. I'm so glad you came back. Although my mother initially said I should take care of myself when I moved back home, she suddenly changed her attitude and began to assign all household chores to me. However, despite her instructions, I noticed that the house was not well maintained. It seemed my mother had never been responsible for housework before. As expected, I ended up doing all the housework alone. Furthermore, my mother was rarely at home, living a carefree life. I was not only juggling work and caregiving but also handling all the household chores. My father, who had lost weight, said, "I'm sorry for causing you trouble. You have a job too." I would shake my head with a smile. It's not your fault, so don't feel so bad. I'm glad I came back home. I enjoy talking with you, Dad. When I conveyed this, my father seemed somewhat relieved. Although I was assisting him with daily tasks, it wasn't to the extent of him being bedridden or unable to eat on his own. Since I was providing occasional help, it wasn't too challenging, and I cherished the extra time spent with my father, reminiscent of my childhood. On the other hand, my mother did nothing but complain. Despite not contributing to the household in any way, Stacy's cooking always seems a bit plain, or rather, frugal, doesn't it? Aren't you worried that these menus won't provide enough nutrition for your sick father? You're an ungrateful daughter. I couldn't help but feel irritated by my mother's comments as she ate my cooking. However, when she brought up my father, I did give it some serious thought. Due to their age, they don't eat much. But maybe having more small dishes would make it easier for my father to eat. I thought about increasing the variety, but my mother didn't say anything. Instead, a few days later, she said, "Lately, there's too much food. Both your father and I can't eat this much. You've been living on your own, so don't you know how to budget?" She said this while finishing her meal, which made me retort, "I know you never asked me to increase the variety of the dishes." I added more small dishes to make it easier for Dad to eat, and to prevent him from getting tired of the same food. In response, my mother audibly sighed and left the table. What's with that attitude? You're making it sound like you're only doing this reluctantly because I complained. You're so patronizing. Unbelievable. You'll never find a husband with that attitude. Always taking any little comment as a complaint. Clearly angry, my mother, still making her point, headed to the sofa in front of the TV. Naturally, she left the dishes on the table. Seated heavily on the sofa, my mother suddenly said, "Coffee." With just one word. Not knowing who would make it for her, I began clearing the table. As I did, my mother tossed a cushion from the sofa towards me. "Come on, make the coffee already. You're practically always at home. Not even going to work. You claim to be taking care of Dad. But aren't you really just after his retirement money? And you can't even handle the housework properly, you're so rude. I've already told you. I switched to remote work. When I'm in my room, I'm attending meetings and working. My mother refused to understand remote work no matter how I explained it. In her mind, I was a burden and an unfilial daughter living off my parents' income under the guise of caregiving. In reality, I was the one doing all the caregiving, providing for my parents' livelihood, and handling all the housework. I had endured my mother's selfishness since childhood, but I had reached my limit. My decision was clear. I couldn't continue living with my father in this house, even if it meant leaving him behind. A few days later, while accompanying my father during his rehabilitation, my father's condition wasn't improving dramatically, but it wasn't worsening either. The doctor encouraged us to continue in the same manner. When we returned home with that plan in mind, my mother was hastily leaving the house with a large bag. My mother often left the house, and it wasn't uncommon for her to return with bags full of items from the department store. I didn't pay it much mind. However, the next day, when I opened the closet to go shopping for the first time in a while, I realized that all my cherished bags and accessories were missing. Why? I hadn't worn them recently, and they hadn't been moved, so they should have been there. At that moment, I remembered my mother's hurried departure yesterday and couldn't help but suspect her. "Mom, did you go into my room yesterday? Why are you asking all of a sudden? This is my house, and I can go into any room I want." "Then what's in that bag?" My mother was holding a bag from a luxury brand, clearly something she had bought today. "You had enough money to buy such expensive items? You always tell me not to waste money. Well, since you waste money, I used it as compensation." Unable to comprehend my mother's words, I furrowed my brows. And my mother started laughing cheerfully. "You, surprisingly, had some nice bags. Just your bags and accessories added up to quite a sum." I was shocked to discover that my mother had sold my accessories without my permission and used the money to buy things for her own hobbies. I couldn't control my anger. I exclaimed, "What? I can't believe it. Stealing and selling without asking for permission, that's worse than a thief. Give them back, compensate me." In response, my mother's face contorted in anger, and she exclaimed, "I can't believe my daughter has the audacity to defy her parents. When I was a child, I always obeyed my parents. I worked for them. I took care of them. Your father is no exception. What have you done while I do everything?" She shouted and angrily slammed the table. "Then why don't you help with Dad's care a bit? Hey, Mom, can you remember any time you helped with Dad's care? Did you prepare his clothes? Did you assist him when he stood up? You don't even do these things. So what do you mean by taking care? You're the one doing the least in this house." Unable to contain my frustration, I slammed my hand on the table, glaring at my mother. I had heard that my mother had a difficult relationship with her paternal grandmother and was subjected to what would now be called daughter-in-law harassment. I couldn't comment on that, but at the very least, I couldn't tolerate her saying that she was taking care of my father. My father had long given up hope of being taken care of by my mother. Still, he tried his best to engage in conversation, discussing topics from television or stories he heard from friends during his rehabilitation. But whenever my father started talking, my mother would quickly leave the room. I couldn't understand how she could claim to be taking care of him without doing anything. While I pondered these thoughts, my mother remained silent. Slowly, she removed her hands from the table and turned her back on me, heading towards the kitchen. I sighed, wondering if my mother was just going to avoid the conversation and stay silent. Unexpectedly, she returned rather quickly. She approached me briskly, clutching a knife tightly in both hands. Mother. Her face was incredibly flushed, and she held the blade pointed in my direction. She was trembling with anger, and her voice was louder than I had ever heard it before. Get out of this house. You're a parasite, living off your father's retirement money. At that moment, I realized that none of my words had reached my mother. To her, no matter how much I had taken care of my father or worked, I was nothing more than a nuisance. I'll find a new place and leave soon. I slowly backed away, keeping my distance as I spoke. Seeing my mother not moving, I rushed to my room. Even though I had expected to feel nothing after being rejected by my estranged mother, tears streamed down my face. Not out of sadness, but out of intense anger. I immediately started taking action. I began preparing to move that day. I consulted a coworker who knew a friend working in real estate for help in finding a new house. During my free time, I packed my belongings into boxes. The search for a new house didn't take too long, thanks to the assistance of my coworker. Once the preparations for the move were complete, I talked to my father. Dad, can I talk to you for a moment? What's the matter? I told my father about all the mistreatment I had endured from my mother. That's terrible. I had a vague sense of your mother's attitude, but I also felt like I was causing trouble, so I couldn't speak up. I'm sorry. Dad, you're not at fault. Actually, I've had my own concerns. When I was healthy, I was burdened with almost all the household chores, like cleaning, laundry, and cooking. It was as if I were treated like a housekeeper. Furthermore, she always demanded money from me, and I was struggling too. My father continued to talk. Even in her current condition, when she needs care, she only relies on you, Stacy, and won't lift a finger to help her daughter. I was deeply disappointed by her attitude. So, truth be told, I'm considering a divorce. I see. Dad, you've been through a lot too. Oh no. Compared to your feelings, Stacy, it was nothing. Thank you so much. No, thank you. Being able to return home and be with you is the best thing that has happened to me. It was the truth. I wanted to be with my father, now and in the future. Dad, there's something I want to discuss. I had a plan in mind, knowing my father's feelings toward my mother. I shared it with him. A few days later, it was decided that we would move while my mother was away. My mother always left the house early every Wednesday morning to attend her hobby, a hula dance class. She would have lunch with friends and return home after 3 p.m. I made arrangements with the moving company to ensure she wouldn't be at home during the Wednesday mornings. They helped us load our belongings onto the truck. Feeling a bit lonely, as if it were the last time in this house, I got into the rental car we had borrowed. I wasn't alone. I was with my father. We decided to move away from my mother because we both shared the desire to do so. While in the car, my father spoke. Stacy, was this the right choice? It was a great opportunity to be liberated from taking care of me while living together. Please don't say that, Dad. I want to live with you. That's what makes me happiest. Let's do our best together from now on. Thank you. We finished moving by early afternoon and had lunch in our new home. I'm sorry, Dad. We had to get takeout lunch today because we didn't have much time. It's nostalgic. I used to eat them often before you came home. I couldn't find time to cook due to work. Your mother always complained, but what could I do? My father laughed. While having this trivial conversation, eating lunch together felt delicious. As I took a break and was tidying up the room, the phone rang. It was from my mother. I answered and put it on speaker so that my father could hear too. Hello. Why have both of you suddenly disappeared? I could tell from her frantic tone over the phone that my mother was in distress. Not only Stacy's things but also your belongings are gone. What does this mean? Dad and I decided to move together. Besides, you told us to leave, didn't you? Is there a problem? We won't have to worry about caregiving or living expenses anymore. What will I do with my life if you're not here, Father? I rely on your retirement money and pension. Where are you now? Why don't you take care of yourself for once? We've already moved to a new place. I won't tell you the location, but we bought a luxury apartment. Ha, a luxury apartment where rich people live, right? Don't joke with me. There's no way you two can afford that. My mother didn't seem to believe it at all, but it was the truth. The two of us moved to a luxury apartment as close as possible to the hospital where my father was receiving treatment. I've said it many times, but I have a stable job. You used to call it pocket money from part-time work, but our company is quite large. And I have a long tenure with a significant role. You might not remember, but I used to deposit $3,000 into the account every month after I came back home. Huh? Wasn't that your father's pension? And the high balance is from the retirement money, right? With the annual income you mentioned, do you think we could get $3,000 every month? As for the retirement money, it was gone by the next month after receiving it. I checked the credit card statement, and it was all spent on brand name bags. So I assume you used it all, right? That's why I was supporting the household expenses. I didn't know. I didn't hear about it. It's not that you didn't hear. It's that you didn't want to listen. I told you many times. Besides, I heard it from Dad too. You were going out with friends every day despite Dad being home since his active duty days. You used to complain everywhere about a husband, claiming he became domineering and controlled you because you couldn't freely spend money anymore. With that situation, how could you only worry about money? Stacy, you knew all that and deceived me. If you have so much money, come back right away. For my mother, it seemed that family members were just wallets. She didn't care about my father's condition and only worried about money. Despite that, her management of the bank deposit was sloppy, and she used her credit card as she pleased, thinking there was no problem. I was astonished that she had managed to live like this until now. My father, impatient with our never-ending conversation, took over. Even if you don't listen to me, I thought you might listen to your daughter. No, it won't work. Thank you for everything, Mom. I want a divorce from now on. Divorce? Wait, Dad, what will happen to my life? You'll be free from taking care of me, and you can live your life as you want. I'll file the divorce later, so please agree. She really can't think of anyone but herself. As I was feeling exasperated, Father hung up the phone without saying anything. Sorry for making you upset. I only said, "Thank you, Dad," to Father, who spoke only one word. The next day, we were going to the hospital for Father's appointment. I never thought we could live in such a convenient place. Thank you, Stacy. I thought it would be better for you to live comfortably. Plus, the cost of living in this area is much lower compared to the downtown high-rises. So we'll have more financial flexibility. We had this conversation as we left home. We arrived at the hospital in about 10 minutes. When the automatic doors at the hospital entrance opened, we were taken aback. Mother was sitting in a chair near the entrance. It seemed like she had been waiting for us since morning to meet us. As soon as she saw us, Mother stood up energetically and walked towards us. "What was that phone call yesterday? I didn't hear anything about your salary or your leaving with Dad. I won't allow you two to live alone." Suddenly, Mother's hand reached out toward me. She grabbed me and said, "Let me live in a luxury apartment too." I was so beyond anger at this point, I could only maintain my composure. Why did she think her wishes would come true with such an attitude? When I thought about it that way, Mother seemed pitiful to me. "It's what Dad and I decided. Please give up. I won't consider you my mother anymore. Thank you for everything up until now. But from now on, let me live my own life. I won't allow that. I don't need your permission. More importantly, let go of my hand. We're in a hospital. If you continue to interfere, I'll call the police." At that moment, Mother, who had regained some composure, finally looked around. Other patients were glancing over at us. Someone who seemed to be a hospital staff member, accompanied by a security guard, was walking towards us. In a hurry, Mother let go of my hand. "Is everything all right?" I said, without looking at the person who addressed me. "Sorry for the disturbance. She's my mother." We had a bit of an argument, saying that I looked at the hospital entrance and saw Mother's back. She seemed weaker than usual. For several days after that, Mother staked out of the hospital and searched for us in the vicinity. But Mother only displayed a tough attitude toward people she deemed weaker than herself. After being driven out by the security guard and scolded by another strong-willed patient as a suspicious person, she never showed her face again. In the end, the last time I saw Mother was that day. Afterward, Father consulted with a lawyer and got serious about the divorce. Mother was unwilling to divorce until the end and even threatened to demand compensation. When she asked her lawyer what compensation was, she apparently realized that she couldn't claim it in her position. Although she tried to cry and persuade the lawyer that she couldn't live on her own, the lawyer calmly introduced her to municipal social assistance and support centers and proceeded with the paperwork. Ultimately, several months after the hospital incident, the divorce was finalized. Father chose to sell the family home, as he no longer had any use for it. Mother vehemently opposed the sale of the house at first. However, as soon as she learned that she would receive money from the sale as part of the property division after the divorce, she quickly changed her tune. Her enthusiastic support made her seem like a completely different person. We sighed together, realizing she had been a money-driven person all along. After Father sold the family home, we began to enjoy a settled life. I was still busy with work, household chores, and caregiving, but the support services in our new neighborhood were much better than in our old one. This allowed me to rely on caregivers during the day and go to work more often. Moreover, Father's condition gradually worsened due to his age. The doctor suggested considering moving him to a care facility, and we were struggling with that decision. After getting used to this new life, one day, there was a call from an unknown number. Thinking it might be work-related, I answered, but it was my mother's voice. "Daisy, I've almost run out of savings." Even though it had only been a few months since she received money from the house sale, it seemed her savings were nearly depleted. "So, can you give me a little money? Consider it my last act of filial piety." "I don't have any money to give you. Dad and I are living happily together. Can you please stop bothering us?" "What do you mean? How can you say that to your mother? You have a good job at a big company, so show some gratitude to your mother. Don't contact me anymore." After exchanging words, I hung up the phone. Later on, she called repeatedly from different numbers. My mother didn't realize the mechanism of call blocking for a while, but eventually, she figured out that she could get through if she called from a different phone. I blocked the incoming phone numbers one by one, but the cat and mouse game continued. As a result, I had to change my phone number, but it did the trick, and the calls stopped coming. Afterward, Father learned about Mother's situation through mutual acquaintances. After her savings ran out, she was living in a run-down apartment in the suburbs, working part-time to make ends meet. She had no time for hobbies, and it seemed she was barely managing to live on her own. I wonder if I can finally live as a human being. Father said, maybe I've spoiled her too much. I thought so too and muttered softly, asking Father, are you happy now? Father smiled at me and said, of course. Thank you, Stacy. I'm sorry for causing you so much trouble.